spoke and said in response to God telling him to go and begin the Exodus, what if they do not believe me? Do not listen to me, and instead say, the Lord did not appear to you. And it goes on for another 9 verses, and then Moses says, please, O Lord, I have never been a man of words, either in times past or now that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Right? And the actual Hebrew words, if you look at the end of the Hebrew, ki chevad peh uchevad lashon, and chevad, the root word chaf beis daled, is kaved, which is often translated as heavy. I read a fascinating paper comparing that word and looking at different cultures that were around that time, the Akkadians and the Egyptians, but I think Akkadians in particular because their language is so close to Hebrew, in trying to analyze whether this was a physical disability of Moses. And so looking at medical, I don't know if they were journals or what they wrote back then, diagnoses, and where the word with that root, chaf daled, was present. And his conclusion was it is used occasionally, but it's certainly not, absolutely convincing evidence that this was a physical disability. All right, so that's one part. That's one source where he mentions that he doesn't speak well. Another one is in this week's parsha in Exodus chapter 6, in verse 12. But it just brought the verse before it to, made sense at the time, I guess, to give it some context. But when Moses told this to the Israelites, they would not listen to Moses, right? Just as Moses predicted, they weren't going to listen to him. Their spirits crushed by cruel bondage. And this is where Jack's suggestion that that maybe Moses couldn't hear, I've seen never mind. All right. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, go and tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and let the Israelites depart from his land. But Moses appealed to the Lord, saying, the Israelites would not listen to me. How then should Pharaoh heed me, a man of impeded speech? All right. Va'ani aral sifatayim. I am. So the root word, and I've talked about this before, in Hebrew, generally words are based on a 3-letter root word. In this case, we have it right in front of us. It's 3 letters. Aral. Aral is also often used to mean somebody who's uncircumcised. So the translator here takes some license and interprets it as impeded, but the more literal translation would be uncircumcised. And of course, the question is, what does uncircumcised lips mean? And that I found another really interesting paper. It's interesting, this issue is studied quite a bit when it comes to language and speech impediments. As just kind of a jumping off point, or really the whole paper itself. All right, so the main source for the stuttering argument seems to be from the following Rashi. Rashi says, and this is for the first source that we did from chapter 4, when Moses says, I am heavy of mouth, or how do you translate it before? Slow of speech. But I think the heavy of mouth is a more accurate one. I speak heavily with, and I don't know who put these parentheses in there, with difficulty. Old French, balbus, which apparently in English translates to stammerer, right? I don't know Old French, I couldn't tell you, but that seems that several places I looked thought that this was the source for it.
One other thought, Rabbi. I think you used the word haram. There's an Arabic word, haram, means unclean.
Yeah.
That's the same connection, but it sounds like it's close enough.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So because are these kind of obscure words, it leaves it open to interpretation. So the Medrash that's what the Medrash is all about, is interpretation. And when there's something that's not explicit, the Medrash tries to fill that void. So there's a little bit of a long one, but I think it's worth, and you may be familiar with it, but I think it's worth reading. Does somebody want to read this?
It's Shelley. I'll read it.
Go for it. Thanks, Shelley.
And the child Moses grew. 24 months she nursed him. And you say, and the child grew. Rather, he grew, not in the way of the rest land. I don't get that. And she brought him to the daughter of Pharaoh.
The rest of the land, like other people.
Got it. And she brought him to the daughter of Pharaoh. The daughter of Pharaoh would kiss and hug and adore him, Moses, as if he were her own son. And she would not take him out of the king's palace. And because Moses was so beautiful, everyone yearned to see him. One that would see him would not leave his presence. And it was that Pharaoh would kiss him, Moses, and hug him, and he would remove Pharaoh's crown and place it on his own head, as he would do to him in the future when he was great. And just as the Holy One, blessed be him, said to Hiram in Ezekiel, I have brought fire from within you, it will consume you. Similarly, the daughter of Pharaoh raised the one who would punish her father in the future. And even the anointed king that is destined to punish Edom sits among them in their own province. As it says,
hold on a second.
As it says in Isaiah, there shall the calf, the Messiah, gaze, and they shall lie down and destroy its branches. And some of the observers sitting among them were the magicians of Egypt that said, be wary of this, that he is taking your crown and placing it on his head.
So this is really where the story kind of, the other part was a tangent that it went off. Now it's coming back to the story. So Moses sitting on the king's lap, and go ahead.
And placing the crown on his head, that he is not the one we say that is prophesy that will take the kingship from you. Some said to kill him, and some said to burn him. And Jethro was sitting among them and said to them, this child has no intent to take the throne. Rather, test him by bringing in a bowl, a piece of gold, and a coal. If he outstretches his hand toward the gold, surely he has intent to take the throne, and you should kill him. And if he outstretches his hand toward the coal, he surely does not have intent to take the throne, and he does not deserve the death penalty. They immediately brought the bowl before him, Moses, and he outstretched his hand to take the gold. And Gabriel came and pushed Moses' hand, and he grabbed the coal. He then brought the hand along with the coal into his mouth and burned his tongue. And from this was made Exodus slow of speech and slow of tongue. Slow of tongue. And she called his name Moshe. From here you can learn about the merit of those that perform acts of kindness. Even though Moses had many names, the only name that was set throughout the Torah was the name that Batjet, daughter of Pharaoh, called him. Even the Holy One, blessed be he, did not call him by another name.
All right, so in between that, we get the explanation that the reason that Moses was the reason Moses had a speech impediment is because he touched the coal, his hand was burning, he put the hand in his mouth. One of the challenges with this story is that we have no reference to anything about his hand. You would think that would have been, heard as well, but it's not. It doesn't say for sure it didn't happen. It's just a little strange that there's no mention of it. All right. So now we have another Rashi, right? The first Rashi, which was on the first reference, used that French word which comes out to stammering. For this reference, where the wording was a little different, where Moses said, "I'm uncircumcised of lips." Let's read the Rashi. It really means obstructed. So Rashi is taking this literally. Obstructed as regards the lips. And he gives some examples where this same root word is used. So too, in respect to all forms derived from RL, ayin resh lamed, I say that they signify obstructed. E.g., one example is from Jeremiah, where it says their ear is arela, so it has the ayin resh lamed, stopped up so that it will not hear, right? And so, in other words, just like a foreskin, it's sort of metaphorical there, meaning that the person can't hear. Another reference from Jeremiah, early in heart, their hearts are closed so they will not understand. Another example from Habakkuk, drink thou also the He'arel, and become thou closed up in thy senses through intoxication, right? And so when somebody is drunk, they lose a certain, a certain degree of being in touch with their senses. That's why they shouldn't drive. So you get the general idea. And then Leviticus, talking about a tree, right? There's a mitzvah of arla with a tree, signifies make for it a closure and cover by means of an inhibition that will prove a barrier against eating it. According to the 11th century Rabbi Abraham Ibn Ezra, Moses' speech impediment was that, okay, so now this is my own writing. That's the end of Rashi. According to the Ibn Ezra, Moses' speech impediment was that he couldn't produce all the normal Egyptian sounds with his tongue and lips. Right, so, we know this, when you speak to somebody from, Latin America, for example, and certain sound, for example, they use for Jose, right? There's a J there, but they're not actually saying the J the way we would. Or many people who didn't grow up saying challah will say hala. Right, so the Ibn Ezra is suggesting that Moses couldn't pronounce some of the letters. So let's see what he says. So unfortunately, this one wasn't translated. So the translation is from me and Google Translate. So no guarantees. The Egyptian knows how to speak plainly. They don't delay in speaking or stuttering, or that they will respect well-known letters. But the custom of the Hebrews, when they want to compare two things or three, will add a word at the beginning, as well as, for example, as well as our son and your son and your son's son. I don't know how else you convey that. But that's the That's the Ibn Ezra. So hold on, he doesn't actually go into the different letters. I must have. That's the source. I mix up the source there. There's another source that talks about the specific vowel sounds, suggesting that the vowel sounds weren't. He had trouble with. The Ibn Ezra is saying just that he was too wordy, basically. Sometimes people talk and you're like, get to the point, and they're going on, and then you start thinking about the shopping you have to do or whatever it is. And so Moses essentially was saying, by the time I get to what I need, I'm going to lose the Pharaoh's attention, and I'm going to, he's not going to listen to me. The Rashbam explains how it is possible that Moses couldn't speak Egyptian despite having been raised in Pharaoh's palace. The Rashbam rejects the interpretation that Moses had a stutter. So this is the Rashbam. I am not fluent in the Egyptian spoken by the upper classes of aristocracy. The reason is that I fled Egypt before I had completed my education there, and in the meantime, I'm 80 years of age. We find in Ezekiel chapter 3, verses 4 through 6, that the prophet is told to address the Jewish people as opposed to addressing the local aristocracy whose tongue is described as unintelligible speech and difficult language. So basically, the Rashbam is saying that he felt like he didn't have enough command of the fancy Egyptian that would be spoken in the palace. And he answers the obvious question. He was raised there. How would he not know it? Because it was a long time ago. Is it possible that, so the Rashbam continues, is it possible that a prophet who could communicate with God freely, i.e. face to face, and who received the Torah from God and communicated it to his people should have been afflicted with a stutter? One could add, and this, I'm not sure if this is from the Rashbam or whether it's whoever translated this brackets here. One could add to the author's rejection of the commonly held view of Moses' speech impediment that if he functioned as a high priest for a full week before his brother Aaron took over, how is that possible if he was afflicted with what would be considered a disabling mum, a blemish, physical blemish for even an ordinary priest? So that would be another argument for saying that it wasn't actually a stutter. Nowhere in our traditional literature of Tanaim and Amoraim is there such a view expressed, and we certainly have no reason to accept such views when they are expressed in whatever that word is. So basically, he finds the idea that Moses had a stutter and wasn't, absolutely perfect, unacceptable. And so it must mean something else. And what does it mean that he didn't remember the High Egyptian? Rabbeinu Hananel explains that although Moses had a speech impediment, the impediment was not stuttering, but rather of having an issue with certain sounds. Oh, this is what I meant to reference that I mentioned before. Represented by certain letters. The very fact that Moses mentioned both these deficiencies of his separately is a clear indication. So it says, Ki chaved peh v'chaved lashon anochi. I am heavy of mouth and heavy of lips. Why does it say both? Because, and we're really conscious of this right now with Sahaba as she's just starting to say, mama and dada, and Dora's upset that she's saying, dada first. And she only has 4 teeth, and certain sounds you just can't make without teeth. Certain sounds come from the lips. Certain sounds require the tongue. So that's the argument that Rabbeinu Hananel is making. The consonants he had difficulty with were Zayin, Shin, Resh, Tzadik, Samach. And when he referred to difficulty of mouth, he had in mind the letters Daled, Taf, or Saf, Lamed, Tet. Rabbeinu Bachia, Shemot, let's see, what does he say? Concerning Moses' additional argument that he was not suitable for this appointment as he was heavy of mouth and tongue, and tongue. I'm slow to speech and slow of tongue. We have been told in Pesikte Zutrata, which I think I also found the source for, on this verse, that while growing up in Pharaoh's palace, Moses once took the king's crown. Yeah, so this is that same medrash that we talked about.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Why is it so important to know so much about this disability? I mean, what's the impact in Judaism or whatever, the impact of this?
Well, so a couple of things. I think on a very practical level, 1% of Americans stutter. For those people, if they believe that Moses stuttered, it might feel a little bit better. It's something that's difficult, and so I think in that sense. In the broader sense, I think it's this glorification, if you will, of Moses. We have that song, Mitbikel, Yivarach Yisrael. We sing about how great Moses was, and this idea that, Moses is a role model, and, whether somehow this takes away from his greatness, which is obviously, it doesn't. But I think it's also just, beyond that, it doesn't really matter all that much. It's really just a curiosity.
Rabbi Shelley, if I may, just to respectfully differ from you, I think it matters a tremendous amount. I think it's very characteristic of many of our forefathers to be disabled, handicapped, to have something missing. Even why David versus Goliath? Why not a 6'7" guy to fight Goliath? I think it's because I can't be, thinking about today, I can't be a left tackle in pro football because I'm not 6'7" and 320 pounds. And in the same way, if God's messengers, if those closest to God were perfect, then I can't be that. But because so many of them were imperfect, I have some hope.
Great point. And as we're going to see a little later, it even goes another step beyond that, where I don't remember who it is, but there's an argument made that, to answer those questions that we asked in the beginning, why would God choose somebody like that? Why wouldn't God, if God literally answers Moses' argument and saying, who made, speech, who made, mouth or whatever it is. And if God can make such great miracles as splitting the sea and all of that, God can certainly, heal a speech impediment. But God intentionally didn't, because God did not want Moses idealized and deified. Egypt was full of magicians, and God wanted to show that this was really a godly redemption and exodus, and not, magic or human power. I don't know how happy Moses was with that, but considering if he is as holy as he was, then I think he was willing to accept it. All right. Great question, Jack. Concerning Moses' additional argument that he was not suitable for this appointment as he was, I'm slow to speech. Right, so it brings that medrash, which I already brought earlier, from Shemot Rabbah. Let's see if there's anything else in here. No, I think I put this here before I actually found the original source. And then I just went and found the original source, but all right. He implied that seeing God had not seen fit to cure. Oh, actually, this is kind of talks to that. Moses implied that seeing God had not seen fit to cure him of this affliction. This was proof that he was not the right man for the mission God wanted to send him on. Actually, the only reason God had never cured him of his stammer had been that Moses had been remiss. Oh, this is a different interesting thing. Moses had been remiss in not praying to be cured. The reason he did not pray to be cured was so as to avoid having no excuse to refuse this mission. It's an interesting theological, even if he's saying it kind of jokingly, which, generally they don't, it's not a, a comedy kind of commentary. It's an interesting theological idea because, if we pray, do we automatically get what we want? Well, clearly that's not always the case. And then do we, you can see it for itself. And then he mentions the Rabbeinu Hananel, which we mentioned earlier about the different vowel sounds. All right, the Ran addresses the question, why would a supernatural God not cure Moses of whatever speech imperfection he had? According to the Ran, the reason Moses had the speech impediment was to show the power of God and not Moses. If Moses was a strong orator, people might have attributed the surrender of Pharaoh to him and not God. So it's a long Ran, so I'm going to skip it and just go with that summary. And then if we have more time, we can go back to it. Let's see what else we have here. Sforno. The reason why I do not possess this facility is because the physical tools with which to express my thoughts are defective. Right, so Sforno sees it as clearly physical. I have therefore never even made the effort to develop this facility of, if somebody's has a hard time speaking, they're not going to bother, unless they think it's psychological, they're not going to go to Toastmasters, just no. So that's Sforno's argument. So this is one of the papers that I found. This is from a professor, Jeffrey Tigga, in the Bulletin of American Schools of Oriental Research. History has known other creative geniuses and national leaders from, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, Demosthenes. Thank you. To Felix Mendelssohn, Churchill, who worked their effect on humanity despite speech impediments. Still, the Bible viewed Moshe as an agent of God whose success owed nothing to his natural endowments, but only to the persuasion worked by the words and deeds he uttered and performed under divine direction. Right, so he's bringing the argument of the Ran that we mentioned before. Another paper, which, see if I have it handy here. I do not, but I can find it in a moment. Give me a second. right, here we go. Just going to share it. I thought it was really interesting. I think this is it. Let's see. Yeah. Where is it? 1 second. Here we go. Was Moses a person who stuttered? Perhaps not. So this person really analyzed it, looked at the Mefarshim that we mentioned, and his argument based on the Rashi, that talks about that takes the translation of RL to mean kind of blocked. What he says is he thinks that it was a speech impediment, not stuttering though. Based on the Midrash story, then Moses most likely had experienced a direct physical trauma to the articulators, tongue and lips, a trauma that is more compatible with the onset of an organically or structurally based articulation disorder rather than with stuttering. And singeing or burning the tongue and lips, the hot coal could very well have caused scarring, muscle and nerve damage. In addition, a webbing or fusing of lingual and labial tissue. Thus, articulatory mobility would be greatly restricted. One use of the Midrash stories is to explain what is described but left unexplained in biblical scripture. Yeah, you get the idea. And so he uses that Midrash and other Midrashim to say that Moses had there was scarring. And when there's scarring, it makes it harder to speak. And, I'm not an expert in stuttering, but from what I've read, they don't know exactly the source of it, but certainly anxiety or pressure adds to it. So I was reading an account of somebody who was saying when he was a kid in school and it came time to say his name or to say present, it was a major source of stress for him. And so he thought he would try using a different name, a name that he found that he didn't stutter with. But then as soon as he used that name, all of a sudden he was stuttering with that name, right? And so that had nothing to do with a physical, his mouth was the same as anybody else's mouth, but there was something else going on, whether it's neurological, whether, I don't know. And from the little bit that I've read, there's still a lot to be learned, but, clearly, and from what I was reading from this person's firsthand experience, he suffered greatly, and he was bringing research that showed that a lot of people don't pursue careers or even higher education and things because of stuttering, because of the fear of not being taken seriously, and not being able to pass oral exams, freezing and that sort of thing. So in that sense, it's a very real thing, and we can kind of use this idea of Moses stuttering or not as a jumping off point to bring awareness to that issue. Any other questions or comments? All right. So Minyan tomorrow at 7:30. Our first Havdalah service is going to be on the 16th, I guess. So it's basically this Saturday night. I don't know what time off the top of my head, but keep an eye out for it. It'll probably be the same link.
I could get on. Just to comment with stuttering, as far as our president obviously had a big issue growing up.
Exactly.
Studying. I mean, and, he showed that story with a little boy, which is really, a heartwarming, leave it like that story. But it was a real thing for real people.
Yeah. And it's interesting without, diving too deep into the political. A lot of people were saying that, Biden has dementia, he's slow and he's cognitively declining. How can you vote for him, for those that voted for him? I'm not his doctor. I can't tell you for sure about anything. But knowing that he stuttered all his life certainly explained, at least in part, if not all of his struggle to answer. So, for example, I was reading that part of stuttering is either repeating the same word or having trouble kind of pulling the word out, saying it. And you certainly see that at times with him. And, being in a high pressure debate, I would think is probably where something like that comes out the most. And he managed to, be a senator for many years as well as ultimately, become president.
Yeah. One of the characteristics of a stutterer is that they will very often not be able to get a word out that they wanted, and they'll try to switch words and they'll substitute others. And a lot of what happens when Biden speaks is that he'll start a sentence, he'll say something, and then he'll stop and he'll look for a word. It's a very classic stuttering compensation. People take it that he doesn't remember, he has dementia, whatever. It's not at all related to that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, I know for me that was helpful to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, guys. It was a pleasure as always. As I mentioned at the beginning, I got my first shot of the vaccine. I'm hopeful. I haven't had any symptoms so far. Not even the pain that people have been talking about. It's the Moderna, so hopefully that stays the same for me and for everybody. And I really hope that people have the courage to take it, because if not, then we're going to be struggling with this for a long time.
Yep.
How you doing?
Hope so too.
Yeah.
Stay healthy.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You got it. Bye.
Bye-bye.